Hi, I'm Lucy from Sew Essential, and today I'm showing you a step-by-step sew-along tutorial for how to make the Friday Pattern Company Saturday skirt set skirt. So I'll show you everything step by step, how you can make this gorgeous, easy to sew, easy to wear skirt. The pattern and the fabric and everything else I talk about, they're all available on our website. I'll pop links to our website below, and now let's get started. So the first thing you're going to do is cut all of your pattern pieces out of your fabric, and if you need any tips on how to do that, I'm going to pop a link to an article and a video below to talk you through. But then you're going to place, the first step is placing the pocket facings right sides together with the front skirt piece, which is what I've done here. So you can see there, that's the right side of the pocket facing fabric, that's the right side of the front skirt piece. And I've pinned that together, and I've just pinned it along this diagonal seam here because that is the length of fabric that we're going to stitch. Just a little tip here is that when fabric is cut diagonally like that, we call it cut on the bias, and that can mean that the fabric can stretch slightly. It's more likely to stretch. So if you are worried about that, what you could do is sew 1/4 inch away from the raw edge, just sew a single line of stitches on the pocket facing piece and also the skirt front piece separately, not joining them together, and that's what we call stay stitching, and that will just stabilise that fabric and prevent it from stretching out of shape. But you probably won't stretch it out of shape, in all honesty. It isn't in the pattern instructions because it is a low risk, but I just wanted to add that as an extra top tip. I also just wanted to mention that when you cut your fabric out, you do want to mark your notches on the fabric. So you will find little lines like that at various places on the pattern pieces, and you just snip into the fabric less than the seam allowance, probably 1/4 inch, just to make those little markings, because then there'll be a corresponding mark on the front skirt pattern piece in this case, and that helps you to line everything up and position everything correctly. And the pattern also recommends that you notch your centre front and centre back because you're going to use that when you attach your waistband. Okay, so now we're going to sew that diagonal seam 3/8 inch from the edge. I'm using a seam guide foot, which can be really useful for beginners. You can also get just general seam guides that you stick to the needle plate. We stock them all on our website, and I'll pop links below. But otherwise you use the markings on your needle plate to determine the seam allowance. But we're just going to sew that with a 3/8 seam, back tacking at the start and end of every seam to secure it. And if you've got a machine with needle up down, it's useful to finish with the needle in the down position when you're sewing, because it will just allow you to reposition things and move things if you need to without fear of the fabric moving. Okay, so you can see I've sewn the diagonal seam to where it turns the corner and starts going straight again, and then I'm just going to repeat that on the other side, and then we'll finish the seam allowances. If you haven't got an overlocker, you'll do this with an overcasting stitch on your sewing machine, but I'm going to use my overlocker just to finish that raw edge of the fabric. Now I'm going to finish the raw edges of that diagonal seam. I'm using my overlocker. I just wanted to show you an overlocker in action, but if you haven't got an overlocker, you can just use the overcasting stitch on your sewing machine. And I'm also going to use my overlocker to do some of the construction seams. When I sew the front and the skirt and the back of the skirt together, I'm just going to sew and finish the seams all in one go with my overlocker, because that is an option you've got with an overlocker. But if you haven't got one, you can just sew the seams in the normal way with your sewing machine, and then you can finish them in your chosen way too. But I'll just go ahead and finish the edge of these seams now. So there you can see it's neatly finished, the edge of the fabric all nice and neat and finished, so that won't fray now, and that will keep everything, it will help your garment last longer as well. Now I've pressed the seam allowance towards the pocket facing. This is the pocket facing on the right hand side. And if you want any tips on how to press in dressmaking, I'm going to pop a link to my video for that below as well. But what we're going to do now, just to make sure everything stays in place, is we're going to do an edge stitch or an understitch just along that seam on the pocket facing side. So if I just pull my machine towards me, I'm going to position the fabric so I've got the pocket facing here. This side is the actual skirt, and about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the seam where the pocket facing joins the front skirt, I'm just going to sew, and that will keep that seam allowance and that pocket facing underneath once we press everything and it's attached to the skirt properly. So again, going to secure our stitches at the beginning and the end of the seam, and you just want to sew 1/8 of an inch away from that seam on the pocket facing side. So you can see there, you can see that line of stitching, that's on the pocket facing side, and that's going through the seam allowance because the seam allowance has been pressed that way as well. And then when that gets pressed under later in the process, that will just keep that pocket facing tucked away nice and neatly so that it won't be coming forward and showing on the right side of your garment. So here we've got the front skirt piece, we've got our pocket facings attached, pressed away from the skirt and understitch or edge stitch there. And then we're going to take our pocket backs and we're going to put them right sides together with the pocket facing, matching up the curved edges like so. Sorry, that one's upside down. So there we go, we'll match them up, they're the same shape, and you just want to match them up around that curved edge, and we'll pin that all the way around the curved edge, and we'll sew that curved edge with a 3/8 seam, so all the way around the curved edge like so. And then I'll repeat that on the other side and sew that curved edge. But then once we've done that, this will fold back underneath the skirt, and this is where your notches come in again, because you want your notches on the top of the pocket. So you will have had notches on the top of the pocket, and you'll have notches around the waist of the skirt. And when you fold it back and position everything, those notches will line up so that you know you've got everything in the right place. And I can see there that my pocket notch and my waist notch are matching up nicely. This is the waist edge of the skirt. And then what we'll do is we'll just sew a 1/4 inch seam along there just to secure the pocket in place so that it stays in the correct position as we continue constructing the skirt. So I'm just going to sew that curved edge of the pocket, and I'm going to sew the seam and finish the edges all in one using my overlocker. I know that if I line the edge of the fabric up with the edge of the needle plate, that is a 3/8 seam because it's 3/8 from the left needle to the edge of the needle plate. If you're using a sewing machine, just sew a 3/8 seam how we did in the earlier steps, and then finish the seams with your chosen method. So now the skirt's going to really start to take shape because we've got our pockets attached. I've given them a press along that diagonal edge. So your edge stitching or understitching should be pressed so that it doesn't show on the right side of the garment. That should be underneath. And I'm just going to turn this over so you can see what it looks like. So you've got your pockets there on either side, here and here. So you can see there those curved pockets that we made there on the inside of the skirt now. I have sewn a stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric just to secure those pockets in place, like I mentioned. You can use a tacking stitch or a basting stitch, a longer stitch length, in case you want to rip those out afterwards, but they're going to be taken into the seam allowance anyway, because the seam allowance is 3/8, so that will be deeper than that. So I'm just going to leave mine in. I'm quite happy with that. And then the next stage, if we just put the skirt this way, is that we are going to really see the skirt start to take shape now, because we are going to attach the front of the skirt to the back of the skirt. So this is a side seam here. That's where the pocket is here, the diagonal pocket. So we're going to put the front skirt piece and the back skirt piece right sides together. And pin that in place, right sides together, the front and the back. And you just want to make sure that when you get to this bit where the pocket is, you've got 3 layers there. You've got your pocket facing, your pocket back, and your front skirt. And you need to make sure that the back skirt is matching up with all of that. And those notches we talked about earlier will help you there to line everything up nicely. I think one thing that's worth mentioning with this side seam step as well is if you are a beginner and you're worried about making sure all of those layers line up together properly, one thing you could do is you could use a tacking or basting stitch, again 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric, just to sew the 2 pocket layers together. And then that might help you just to line everything up and make sure everything's correct. But it's just really important to check that all those raw edges are meeting up nicely where the pockets are, and where you've got those 4 layers, where you've got 2 layers for the pockets and the front and the back of the skirt. Just make sure they're all lining up nicely before you go and sew it together. But as I say, you could always add in an extra step if you wanted to, and you could just tack just the pocket layers together so that they're almost like one layer then, and it just makes life a little bit easier for you. It's just a little bit of a tip for a beginner. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew those side seams with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, I'm using my overlocker to do it all in one step, but if you're using a sewing machine, just sew a line of stitches 3/8 from the edge of the fabric and then finish your seams as a separate step. There we have it, the side seam is sewn and finished, and the pockets are caught in that side seam. We're going to prepare the waistband pieces now. Now I mentioned I decided to interface the front waistband piece just to give it a little bit more structure and stability, I used a very lightweight interfacing. I'll pop a link to it below for you. I don't think the pattern suggests this, but from experience, sometimes a waistband can stretch out if it's not interfaced. I know the back is going to be elasticated, but I just thought I wanted to just have that little bit of stability and structure. So I've chosen to do that. So I just used an iron-on interfacing, and then we're just going to fold the waistband in half lengthwise and give that a nice press. And I'm just using my mini prim ironing board and mini prim iron. It is a steam iron, but it does get hot enough that you can just use the heat. You don't necessarily need the steam. I would use the steam on seams and things like that, but I think this will serve the purpose for here and just working in this small space, the video. It's really handy having this mini iron and mini ironing board. So yeah, just give that a nice press. And then we'll do the same to the back waistband piece, which I haven't interfaced. I haven't interfaced the back because the back is going to be elasticated, so that doesn't need interfacing, but I just chose to do that front piece just to give it that bit of extra stability and structure. So you can see that's pressed nice and neatly now, wrong sides together. And then we're going to repeat that process on this back piece, which looks a lot bigger, a lot longer, and that is because it's going to be gathered up by the elastic. And this viscose fabric is just absolutely gorgeous. As far as viscose fabrics go, it's got all the beautiful fluidity and drape and movement you'd expect. It's got that lovely cool feel to it, but the nice thing is it's a really nice weight as well. It's like not flimsy. It's perfect for making a skirt. You can make a dress with it as well, but you know, some of them are just a bit flimsy, but this one isn't at all. It's a really nice weight. Okay, so we've got our back waistband pressed wrong sides together lengthwise, and then also our front waistband, we've done the same. Now we're going to create a channel in our back waistband piece to insert our elastic into. So I'm going to sew a stitch, a tacking or basting stitch 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge of the fabric, where those raw edges meet up. If you remember, we pressed it wrong sides together. So you can see there, I'm sewing that side. Obviously that's the fold that we pressed. And a tacking or basting stitch is usually just a bit longer than a standard stitch, so it's easier to rip out. So I'm adjusting my stitch length to 3.5, and I'm using my seam guide foot here to keep me on track with my 3/8 of an inch seam. You can get these for different makes and model of machine on our site, so it's worth looking out for those. But also, if you haven't got one of those, you just use the markings on your needle plate, and this is how you would sew a seam for those side seams of the skirt as well. You would just line the raw edge of the fabric up with the relevant marking on the needle plate that will give you a 3/8 seam. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew that tacking stitch now. Okay, so you can see there I've got that tacking stitch 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge of the fabric, and that's created a little tunnel or casing as it's referred to for me to insert my elastic into. Now I need to insert the elastic into the back waistband piece. So I'm using this prim elastic. I'll pop a link to this below for you. It's nice and soft, and it's 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres wide, and in the pattern it tells you the length of elastic to cut for your size. So I've cut that according to those instructions, which was 31 centimetres for the size medium, which is what I'm making. And then I've just attached a big safety pin to the end, and I'm just going to push the elastic into the casing and pull it all the way through using that safety pin to do it. And then obviously you don't want to lose your elastic in there, so you might want to pop a safety pin or a pin through there just to hold that in place while you pull the other end through, or you can just hold on to it. But yeah, the last thing you want to do is for that to end up disappearing into the casing, because then you'll just have to start again. So, but when it's an inch wide like this, it's a bit less fiddly than it can be on some really narrow casings that you might have on like sleeve hems and things like that sometimes. And just watch your elastic doesn't get twisted as well as you're pulling it through. Just make sure it's staying flat and in the same direction. So if you need to, just flatten it out as you feed it through. So I'm just going to distribute the fullness of the fabric along the elastic. There we go, and we can worry about redistributing that properly once it's done. And then we're just going to go ahead and just tack the ends down to the elastic. So I'm going to remove my safety pin. And then I'm going to tack the ends and just tack through the elastic to secure that in place with the 3/8 seam again. And then repeat on the other side. So just get the raw edge of the elastic to line up with the raw edge of your fabric, and then tack that down. Now we're going to attach the back waistband piece to the front waistband piece. So to do that, I'm going to line the short edges up together, right sides together, like so. And then I'm going to open the front waistband piece, so the non-elasticated waistband piece. I'm going to open that out and wrap it around the elasticated piece. So you are enveloping your elasticated piece inside the non-elasticated piece. We've got the elasticated piece there. We're going to line those short raw edges up like so, and then we're going to open the non-elasticated front waistband piece and wrap it around that back waistband piece like so. And then I'm just going to pin that, and I'm going to stitch down that short edge with the 3/8 seam. So just make sure your raw edges are lining up nicely. Everything's in the correct position. And I'm just going to adjust my stitch length back down to a normal stitch length. And I just went backwards and forwards a couple of times there because I didn't quite reach the edge of the fabric, and I wanted to make sure that I did. And then I'm going to repeat that process on the other end. And then once you've done that, you will be able to turn the waistband out like so, and everything will match up nicely. You might want to trim or clip this seam slightly. You might want to trim that down with your scissors just to make it a little bit less bulky and a little bit narrower. You might want to cut off the corner, but you might not need to. For me, actually, that's come out as a really nice crisp straight corner, so I probably won't trim that down. But yeah, you just repeat on the other side and then your waistband will be ready to attach to the skirt. Okay, so here I've got my finished waistband. I've got the front waistband piece, which is the flat piece, and the elasticated back piece. And we're just going to match this up now, right sides together with the skirt. So those centre front and centre back notches are going to be important. You want to be matching those up. And then also your side seams where your front and skirt back and pieces meet, your front and back skirt pieces meet, your front and back waistband will meet as well. That's the side seam. You want to match those up as well. If you're struggling to find your notch on your back piece because it's now gathered, just fold it in half like so, and you can just pop a pin where the centre back is. And then when you pin it to the skirt, you want to do it right sides together, but you want to put your pins on the waistband side, because you need your elastic to be on the top when you're sewing. So start by matching your side seams up first, get those together, and it's probably easiest to just match and pin the front waistband piece first, because obviously that's not elasticated, so that's pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to pin the side seams in place, and I like to just run the pin through the seam, the actual seam, to make sure it's going to match up nicely when I sew it in place. So I've got my first side seam in place, then I'll find my centre front on the skirt and the waistband with the notches, and I'll just pin that in place as well, like so, and then I can pin the rest of it, pin the gap between the centre front and the side seam. I can pin that down like so, and that will all match up nicely. That's it, that's pinned there, and then we're going to carry on to the other side. Make sure you don't get your waistband twisted when you're doing this as well. Make sure everything's lying flat, but let's match those side seams up again. And then we can pin the section between the front and the side seam. And now the trickier bit is pinning the back in place, because obviously it's elasticated, so it can be quite tricky to do. But just start by matching your centre backs. So find your notch on your skirt piece and on your waistband piece, and then pin that in place. And then you're going to stretch the elastic as you sew to match it up with the skirt. So to be honest, I probably find it easier just to go ahead and sew that, but if you're a beginner or you're not that confident, you might want to just pin it in place, and in that case just stretch it like so and pin it in place. Okay, so everything's pinned in place now. We've got the front waistband pinned and the back waistband pinned. So the front's pinned there and the back's pinned there. And then when you take it to the machine and sew it, you'll stretch your elastic so that the elasticated waistband matches the length of the back of the skirt. And we'll just sew that in place. Just take your time, take it easy, and just, you know, stop if you need to. Use that needle up down if you've got that facility on your sewing machine, so that when you stop, the needle's in the down position and you can just check everything's in the right place. So now I'm going to attach the waistband to the skirt. I'm starting with the nice flat front easy bit first, and I'm going to back tack to secure the seam and sew it with a 3/8 of an inch seam. Now you will have seen me stop and reposition a few times then, and I was just making sure that the pocket bags were lying flat, that there weren't any tucks in the skirt piece, that everything was lying nice and flat. And that's where that needle cut up down comes in. If you put your needle down, you can lift the foot and just reposition things, but you know your stitches are going to stay in the same place. And then now we come on to the elasticated bit. So this is the trickier bit to sew, but just take it easy. You know, there's no rush, it's not a race. And all you need to do as you sew, if you pull your waistband, you will be able to get the edge of the waistband to match up with the edge of the skirt, and you're going to sew along that seam that we sewed for the casing as well, so you've got that there as a guide to help you. But just take it easy, as I say, and work your way around gradually. Stop if you need to, and yeah, it'll all be happy days. So you can see here, I'm just stretching that elastic and I'm making sure that the raw edges are lining up, and then I can follow that line where we sewed the casing, but I've just got to be very, very careful not to catch the elastic as well, because your stitches might pop if you catch the elastic, and the elastic stretches when you're wearing it. It can stretch the stitches and pop those, so you do want to avoid doing that. But you can see there I'm pulling from the front and the back. I've got everything lined up nicely, and then I can follow that line of stitching. Then if you need to stop, just stop, reposition, and then go on to your next section. And you can pull behind the machine here and at the front, and just make sure those fabric edges are lining up nicely as you sew. And there we go, the waistband's now attached at the front and the back looks lovely with all those gathers. If you've got any stray whiskers like me poking out, just snip those off. And then all we need to do now, obviously there's a lot of fraying fabric going on here, so we need to finish the raw edges of that fabric. I'm going to do that on my overlocker. You could do it with an overcasting stitch. If you're using a sewing machine, I would recommend you trim all of that off first, because it might get caught with your needle or in your needle plate, so just tidy things up a bit before you do that step. So the waistband is attached to the skirt now, and just go around and just check that it's all attached nicely, that you haven't got any tucks or anything. And then once you're happy with how it's attached, I'm just going to finish the raw edges of that seam where the skirt joins to the waistband. I'm going to do that on my overlocker. And then I'm also going to sew the raw edge of the hem on my overlocker as well, because that's the edge finish I'm going to do. I'm just going to sew it on my overlocker, and then I will press it up and stitch it down with a top stitch, because that's just a nice quick easy way to finish a hem. You might want to press it under and press it under again if you haven't got an overlocker. But yeah, that's my preferred method for a nice quick easy hem. If you're using a viscose fabric like this as well, ideally you would hang it up and let it drop before you hem it, just in case the fabric drops a bit. So yeah, all that means is just literally hang it on a coat hanger, leave it for like 24 hours, and then just check that the hem hasn't dropped. If it has, you just level it and then you would sew your hem. But I'm pretty confident. This seems like a relatively stable viscose to me, so I'm not really worried about that happening. I'm just going to go ahead and hem it now. So that's just neatened everything up. You can see I've just got that nice, neat, finished seam on the inside now. So I'm going to give that a press up towards the waistband and just tuck away these tails on my overlocking thread. I'll go away and do that in a minute, but then I'm just going to do the hem as I mentioned. So I'm just going to overlock all the way around to finish that off, and then I can press it under and top stitch it down. So there again, we've got that nice neat edge, and I've just got to press that under and top stitch it down with my desired hem length. I've given the waistband a good steamy press, so everything's looking nice and neat there now, and I gave the elastic a bit of steam as well. And then I have pressed under the hem, so you saw me overlock the edge of the fabric. I've pressed that under, and then I'm just going to stitch that down using my seam guide foot. And you could pin this in place if you wanted to. If you're a beginner, for a bit more confidence, you might want to just pin that in place. But as I said, it's a relatively stable viscose fabric. I'm quite happy with it, so I'm just going to go ahead and stitch. I'm quite happy with how stable it is now. I've pressed it in place, and I think I'm going to go for a 1/4 inch hem there. I think the pattern suggests 3/8. It suggests pressing it up 3/8 and up 3/8 again, so 3/4 inch hem. But I'm just going to go for a 3/8 hem, and I'm going to just stitch it down at a 1/4 inch. And I'm just going to snip those stray threads off, and I'd give that hem a little press. But that's it, we now have a finished Saturday skirt set skirt. So I hope you enjoyed that really in-depth tutorial, and it's helped you to understand some tips and some advice around some of the different steps of sewing a simple skirt, and that you can see that, you know, it's quite easy to create a lovely simple skirt with a bit of help and a bit of advice along the way. Don't forget you can purchase the pattern and the fabric on our site. I've popped links to everything below, and if you like what you see today, please like and subscribe. We're heading towards 100,000 subscribers on our channel now. We're at over 94,000, so if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button and help us get to 100,000. And thank you to all of those of you who've already done it. Thanks for your support, all your lovely comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.